The digital clock on my nightstand reads 2:47 a.m., and I'm lying here again, wide awake, watching Arthur sleep. If this story resonates with you, drop a heart in the comments. His face is turned toward me now, peaceful in the dim light filtering through our bedroom curtains, and I can hear the steady rhythm of his breathing across the narrow space between our twin beds. 6 months ago, he used to sleep facing the wall, curled away from me in what felt like a natural boundary between roommates. Now, every night, he faces me, and I don't know how much longer I can pretend this doesn't affect me. I've been lying to myself for weeks, maybe months, telling myself that the way my heart races when I catch glimpses of his sleeping face is just normal roommate awareness. That the careful attention I pay to his breathing patterns, the way I've memorized how his hair falls across his forehead when he's deep in sleep, the fact that I know exactly when he's having a restless night versus when he's completely at peace. All of this is just what happens when you share a small space with someone. Just practical cohabitation awareness. But it's not. And the growing weight of that truth is crushing me. Arthur shifts slightly, his lips parting as he exhales, and I force myself to look away, staring at the ceiling instead. The apartment is quiet except for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional creak of the old building settling. These are the hours when I can't hide from myself anymore, when the careful facade I maintained during daylight hours crumbles, and I'm left with the raw, terrifying reality of what I've been feeling. I've always been straight. Always. Had girlfriends in high school, dated women in college, never questioned it. Arthur knows about my ex-girlfriend Sarah, about the casual dates I've been on since we moved in together. He's seen me swipe through dating apps, heard me talk about women I found attractive. And I wasn't lying then. I did find them attractive, did enjoy those relationships. But this thing with Arthur, this growing awareness of him, feels different, deeper, more consuming than anything I've experienced before. The worst part is how innocent it all started. Arthur mentioned a few months ago that he'd been having trouble sleeping, that his insomnia was getting worse. He said something about feeling isolated facing the wall, how the room felt too big and empty when he couldn't see me. It's weird, he'd said with that easy laugh of his, but I sleep better when I can see you're actually there. Like, knowing you're okay makes my brain shut off easier. He'd been so casual about it, so matter of fact, like it was the most natural thing in the world to find comfort in my presence. And I'd encouraged it. Told him whatever helped him sleep better was fine with me. I'd been so focused on being a good friend, on supporting him through his insomnia struggles, that I didn't anticipate how it would affect me. How those first few nights of catching glimpses of his peaceful face would evolve into this nightly ritual of watching him, studying him, memorizing every detail of how he looks when he's completely unguarded. Arthur murmurs something in his sleep, a soft sound that makes my chest tighten. His hand is curled near his face, fingers slightly curved, and I remember how those same fingers brushed against mine yesterday when we were both reaching for the remote. Such a brief contact, probably meaningless to him, but it had sent electricity through my entire body. I'd pulled my hand away too quickly, made some excuse about needing water, and spent 10 minutes in the kitchen trying to calm my racing heart. This is what terrifies me most, not just that I'm attracted to my best friend, but that I'm attracted to a man. Arthur specifically, yes, but the implications go so much deeper than that. If I can feel this way about him, what does that mean about everything I thought I knew about myself? About my past relationships, my future, my entire identity? I've been researching online, reading articles about sexual fluidity and late-in-life realizations, trying to find some framework for understanding what's happening to me. But reading about it and living it are completely different things. The theory doesn't prepare you for the way your stomach drops when you realize you've been staring at your roommate's mouth while he talks. It doesn't explain how to handle the guilt that comes with feeling like you're betraying his trust by having these feelings he doesn't know about. Arthur trusts me completely. He's comfortable changing clothes in front of me, walking around in just boxers, falling asleep facing me because he feels safe. He talks to me about everything, his work stress, his family drama, his occasional dates with women. He treats me like the straight best friend I've always been, and I'm terrified that these feelings I can't control are going to destroy that trust. The clock now reads 3:15 a.m., and I know I won't sleep tonight. Again, this has become my routine, lying awake, watching Arthur sleep, wrestling with feelings I never asked for and don't know how to handle. During the day, I can mostly function normally, maintain our friendship, pretend everything is the same. But these quiet hours in the darkness strip away all my defenses. Arthur's breathing changes slightly, becoming deeper, and I can tell he's settling into a deeper sleep phase. His face relaxes even more, and in the dim light, he looks younger, more vulnerable. This is when the feelings hit hardest, when I see him like this, completely at peace, trusting me enough to sleep facing me night after night. The intimacy of it overwhelms me, and I'm struck again by how much I want to protect that peace, even as my feelings for him threaten to shatter it completely. I close my eyes, trying to force myself to sleep, but behind my eyelids, I can still see his face, can still feel the weight of this secret growing heavier with each passing night. Something has to give soon. I can't keep living like this, caught between the friend he needs me to be and the person I'm apparently becoming. But I'm terrified that choosing honesty might mean losing him entirely, and I don't know if I'm strong enough to risk that. The truth is becoming impossible to ignore, and I'm running out of ways to hide from it. The morning light filtered through their thin curtains as Harold stirred awake, immediately aware of Arthur's presence across the narrow space between their beds. His roommate was still sleeping, face relaxed and peaceful, turned toward Harold just as he had been for the past 3 months. Harold's chest tightened with that familiar mixture of warmth and panic that had become his constant companion. They had been best friends since their sophomore year at State, bonding over late-night study sessions and shared dreams of making it in the city after graduation. Now, 2 years later, they were living that dream in a cramped studio apartment where the bedroom barely fit their twin beds with a nightstand squeezed between them. Arthur had suggested the arrangement when they'd first toured the place, laughing about how it would be like an extended sleepover. Harold had agreed easily then, thinking nothing of sharing such close quarters with his best friend. Arthur shifted slightly in his sleep, and Harold found himself studying the curve of his friend's jaw, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. These moments of observation had become a dangerous ritual, one that Harold both craved and despised himself for. He forced his gaze away, focusing instead on the water stain on the ceiling that had been there when they'd moved in. Morning. Arthur's voice was thick with sleep as he stretched, and Harold's heart jumped at being caught looking in his direction. Hey, Harold managed, sitting up and reaching for his phone to check the time. Sleep okay? Arthur nodded, running a hand through his messy hair. Better than I have in months, actually. I think facing this way really does help with the insomnia. Harold remembered when Arthur had first mentioned his sleep troubles, how he'd toss and turn for hours facing the wall, staring at the faded paint and counting sheep that never seemed to work. It had been Arthur's idea to try sleeping facing the other direction, toward Harold's bed instead of away from it. Something about not feeling so alone in the dark, Arthur had explained with that easy smile that made Harold's stomach flip. That's good, Harold said, though the words felt hollow. He was glad Arthur was sleeping better, truly he was, but the change had created an entirely new problem that Arthur couldn't possibly understand. Arthur swung his legs over the side of his bed, wearing only boxer shorts and a faded college t-shirt that rode up slightly as he moved. Harold forced himself to look away, focusing on finding his own clothes for the day. This was exactly the kind of innocent moment that had been driving him crazy for months. Arthur's casual comfort with their shared space, the easy intimacy of their daily routines that felt so natural to his friend but had become a source of constant tension for Harold. Coffee? Arthur asked, padding toward their tiny kitchen area. Yeah, thanks. Harold listened to the familiar sounds of Arthur moving around their apartment, the coffee maker gurgling to life, the soft shuffle of bare feet on the hardwood floor, the gentle humming that Arthur did unconsciously when he was content. These were the sounds of home, of safety, of the friendship that had anchored Harold through college and beyond. They were also the sounds that now filled him with a longing he couldn't name or acknowledge. Arthur returned with 2 steaming mugs, settling cross-legged on his unmade bed while Harold sat on the edge of his own. This was their morning ritual, stolen moments before the day demanded they become the professional versions of themselves. Arthur worked at a nonprofit downtown while Harold had landed a position at a small marketing firm. They'd leave separately, return at different times, but always found their way back to these quiet conversations that bookend their days. So, I was thinking, Arthur said, blowing on his coffee. Maybe we could have people over this weekend? It's been a while since we've seen everyone. Harold's stomach clenched. Their college friends had always treated them as a unit. Harold and Arthur, Arthur and Harold, inseparable since day one. During their visits, people would joke about how well they worked together, how they seemed to read each other's minds, how they were like an old married couple. The comments had always made Harold laugh before. Now they made him want to disappear. Sure, Harold said, because saying no would require an explanation he couldn't give. The usual crew? Yeah, maybe order pizza, play some games. Like old times. Arthur's face lit up with genuine excitement, and Harold felt that familiar stab of guilt. Arthur's happiness was so pure, so uncomplicated, while Harold felt like he was drowning in secrets and confusion. Arthur reached over to grab his phone from the nightstand, his arm brushing against Harold's shoulder in the process. The contact was brief, meaningless, the kind of casual touch that had always been normal between them. Harold's skin burned where Arthur had touched him, and he had to resist the urge to pull away entirely. I should probably shower first, Harold said, standing abruptly and grabbing his towel from the hook by their shared dresser. Harold, Arthur's voice was soft, concerned. You okay? You've seemed kind of distant lately. Harold froze, his back still turned to Arthur. This was exactly what he'd been afraid of, that his internal struggle would start showing, that Arthur would notice the walls Harold had been unconsciously building between them. Arthur knew him too well, could read his moods and silences like a book they'd written together over years of friendship. Just work stuff, Harold lied, finally turning around with what he hoped was a reassuring smile. You know how it is. Arthur studied his face for a moment, those perceptive eyes that Harold both loved and feared, searching for something Harold couldn't let him find. Finally, Arthur nodded, though Harold could see he wasn't entirely convinced. Well, you know I'm here if you want to talk about it, Arthur said, and the genuine care in his voice made Harold's chest ache. I know, Harold replied, and he did know. Arthur had always been there, through every crisis and celebration, every doubt and dream. Arthur was the person Harold called when he got promoted, when he was stressed about money, when he needed someone to remind him that he was capable of more than he believed. Arthur was his safe harbor, his constant, his home. And that was exactly the problem. As Harold headed toward the bathroom, he caught sight of their reflection in the mirror above their dresser. Arthur still sitting cross-legged on his bed, looking after Harold with worried eyes, and Harold himself, towel clutched in white-knuckled hands, looking like a man running from something he couldn't escape. Because the truth was, Harold wasn't running from Arthur. He was running from himself, from the growing certainty that somewhere along the way, his feelings for his best friend had shifted into something deeper, more complicated, more dangerous than simple friendship. And every night, as Arthur slept peacefully facing him across their small bedroom, Harold lay awake wrestling with the terrifying possibility that he might not be as straight as he'd always believed himself to be. The hot water of the shower couldn't wash away the weight of that realization, couldn't cleanse him of the longing that had taken root in his chest and was growing stronger with each passing day. Harold pressed his forehead against the cool tile and tried to imagine a future where these feelings would simply disappear, where he could go back to being Arthur's best friend without this constant undercurrent of want and fear. But as he heard Arthur's laugh drifting through the thin bathroom door, probably at something on his phone, Harold knew that future was becoming more impossible with each passing night. The days that followed became a careful dance of awareness and avoidance. Harold found himself cataloging every moment between them with an intensity that felt both thrilling and torturous. When Arthur would stretch in the morning, his shirt riding up to reveal a strip of skin, Harold would force himself to look away, but not before his pulse quickened. When Arthur would lean over his shoulder to see what he was reading, Harold could smell his shampoo and feel the warmth radiating from his body, and it took everything in him not to lean into that closeness. The movie nights were the worst. Their usual routine of sprawling on the couch together, Arthur's legs often draped over Harold's lap or their shoulders touching as they shared popcorn, had become a minefield of sensation. Harold would find himself hyper-aware of every point of contact, every casual touch that Arthur gave so freely. When Arthur would laugh at something on screen and unconsciously grab Harold's arm, Harold's skin would burn where Arthur's fingers had been, long after the touch had ended. You're being weird, Arthur said one evening, pausing their show when Harold shifted away from him for the third time. Did I do something wrong? Harold's heart hammered against his ribs. Arthur's eyes were so open, so trusting, and Harold hated himself for the distance he was creating. No, you didn't do anything. I'm just tired, I guess. Arthur studied his face for a long moment, and Harold had to resist the urge to squirm under that gentle scrutiny. You've been saying that a lot lately. Are you sure you're okay? The concern in Arthur's voice made Harold's chest tighten. This was exactly what he'd been afraid of, that his struggle would start to affect Arthur, would make him question their friendship. I'm fine, really. Just work stuff. But Arthur didn't look convinced, and Harold could see the hurt flickering in his eyes when Harold moved to the other end of the couch. The space between them felt like a chasm, and Harold wanted nothing more than to close it, to pull Arthur close and stop pretending that his touch didn't set Harold's entire world on fire. The nights were becoming unbearable. Harold would lie in his bed, listening to Arthur's breathing even out, and then he would turn his head just enough to see Arthur's face in the dim light filtering through their curtains. Arthur slept so peacefully facing him now, his features soft and unguarded, and Harold would drink in the sight of him like a man dying of thirst. Sometimes Arthur would make small sounds in his sleep, little sighs or murmurs that made Harold's stomach flip. Once, Arthur had reached out in his sleep, his hand falling across the space between their beds, and Harold had stared at those fingers for what felt like hours, wanting desperately to take that hand in his own. The guilt was eating him alive. Arthur trusted him completely, had changed his entire sleeping position because he felt safer facing Harold, and here Harold was, harboring feelings that felt like a betrayal of that trust. Every morning when Arthur would wake up and smile at him, that easy, affectionate smile that had once been Harold's anchor, now felt like a knife twisting in his chest. Harold started staying later at work, finding excuses to avoid their usual dinner routine. When he would finally come home, Arthur would be waiting, having saved him food or wanting to hear about his day, and Harold would have to manufacture distance even as everything in him wanted to sink into Arthur's warmth and attention. I made your favorite, Arthur said one evening, gesturing to the pasta dish he'd prepared. Thought maybe we could catch up. Feels like I haven't really talked to you in weeks. Harold looked at the carefully prepared meal, at Arthur's hopeful expression, and felt something crack in his chest. Thanks, but I already ate. I'm pretty beat, actually. Think I'll just head to bed. The disappointment that flashed across Arthur's face was like a physical blow. Harold saw Arthur's shoulders slump slightly, saw the way he looked down at the 2 plates he'd set out, and Harold had to grip the doorframe to keep from crossing the room and pulling Arthur into his arms. Oh, Arthur said quietly. Okay, I'll put this away. Harold fled to their bedroom, but even with the door closed, he could hear Arthur moving around the kitchen, the soft clink of dishes being put away, and he knew Arthur was eating alone. The image of Arthur sitting at their small table by himself, eating the meal he'd made for both of them, made Harold feel sick with guilt. When Arthur finally came to bed, Harold pretended to be asleep. He listened to Arthur's quiet movements as he got ready for bed, heard the soft whisper of sheets as Arthur settled into his own bed, and then felt Arthur's gaze on him in the darkness. Harold. Arthur's voice was soft, uncertain. Are you awake? Harold kept his breathing steady, even though his heart was racing. After a long moment, he heard Arthur sigh, a sound so full of sadness that Harold had to bite his lip to keep from responding. The pattern continued for days. Harold would create distance, Arthur would try to bridge it, and Harold would retreat further. He watched Arthur's confusion grow, saw the way Arthur started to second-guess himself, started to pull back his natural affection. The easy touches became less frequent. The casual intimacy they'd always shared began to fade, and Harold felt like he was watching their friendship die by degrees. But even as he created this distance, Harold couldn't stop himself from those stolen moments of watching Arthur sleep. It had become a ritual, a guilty pleasure that he couldn't resist. Arthur's face in sleep was so peaceful, so beautiful, and Harold would lie there memorizing every detail. The way Arthur's eyelashes cast shadows on his cheeks, the slight part of his lips, the way his hair fell across his forehead. One night, Harold was so lost in his observation that he didn't notice Arthur stirring until their eyes met in the darkness. Arthur blinked slowly, his gaze unfocused with sleep, and for a moment they just looked at each other across the space between their beds. Can't sleep? Arthur asked, his voice husky with sleep. Harold's throat felt tight. Just thinking. Arthur was quiet for a moment, and Harold could see him more clearly now that his eyes had adjusted. Arthur's expression was soft, concerned, and Harold felt that familiar tug in his chest, that overwhelming urge to reach out and touch. "You've been thinking a lot lately," Arthur said gently. "Want to talk about it?" The offer hung between them in the darkness, and Harold felt the weight of all the words he couldn't say. He wanted to tell Arthur everything. About the way his heart raced when Arthur smiled at him. About how Arthur's presence had become the center of his world. About how terrified he was of losing this friendship that meant everything to him. Instead, Harold turned away, facing the wall. "It's nothing. Go back to sleep." He heard Arthur's soft intake of breath, heard the hurt in the silence that followed. When Arthur finally spoke again, his voice was smaller, more vulnerable than Harold had ever heard it. "Did I do something wrong, Harold? Because if I did, I want to fix it. I miss you." Those 3 words, "I miss you," hit Harold like a physical blow. Arthur missed him, even though they lived in the same room, even though they saw each other every day. Arthur missed the closeness they used to share, the easy intimacy that Harold had been systematically destroying in his attempt to protect them both. Harold squeezed his eyes shut, his hands fisting in his sheets. "You didn't do anything wrong. Then why do I feel like I'm losing my best friend?" The raw pain in Arthur's voice made Harold's chest ache. He wanted to turn around, to look at Arthur and tell him that he wasn't losing anything, that Harold was just scared and confused and didn't know how to handle what he was feeling. But he couldn't trust himself to look at Arthur right now, not when Arthur sounded so hurt and vulnerable. "You're not losing me," Harold whispered, and it felt like both a promise and a lie. Arthur was quiet for a long time, and Harold thought he might have fallen back asleep. But then Arthur spoke again, so softly that Harold almost missed it. "It doesn't feel that way." Harold lay there in the darkness, listening to Arthur's breathing gradually even out again, and felt like he was being torn apart from the inside. Every instinct he had was screaming at him to turn around, to close the distance between them, to stop hurting the person who mattered most to him in the world. But the fear was stronger than the instinct. The fear of what it would mean if he admitted to himself what he was feeling, what it would mean for his understanding of himself, for their friendship, for everything he thought he knew about his life. So Harold lay there, facing the wall, while Arthur slept facing him, and the space between them felt like an ocean that Harold didn't know how to cross. The sleepless nights had become a routine of exquisite torture. Harold lay rigid in his bed, hyper-aware of every sound Arthur made across the narrow space between them. The soft rustle of sheets, the gentle rhythm of breathing, the occasional murmur that escaped Arthur's lips in sleep. Each sound sent electricity through Harold's nervous system, making rest impossible. Tonight felt different. The air in their small bedroom seemed heavier, charged with an unspoken tension that had been building for weeks. Harold had been creating distance, declining their usual movie nights, avoiding the casual touches that had once felt natural between them. He could feel Arthur's confusion growing, could see the hurt in his friend's eyes when Harold pulled away from what used to be comfortable intimacy. Harold turned onto his side, facing away from Arthur's bed, trying to escape the magnetic pull of watching his friend sleep. But even with his back turned, he could feel Arthur's presence like a physical weight in the room. The knowledge that Arthur chose to sleep facing him, that Arthur found comfort in his proximity, made Harold's chest tight with a mixture of longing and guilt. The sheets rustled behind him, and Harold's breath caught. Arthur was stirring, probably caught in another bout of restless sleep. Harold squeezed his eyes shut, willing himself to breathe normally, to appear asleep. But the movement continued, and then he heard Arthur's voice, soft and concerned. "Harold, are you awake?" Harold's heart hammered against his ribs. He considered pretending to sleep, but something in Arthur's tone made him turn over slowly. In the dim light filtering through their thin curtains, he could see Arthur propped up on one elbow, his hair mussed from sleep, his eyes searching Harold's face with gentle worry. "Yeah," Harold whispered, his voice rougher than intended. "Can't sleep." Arthur shifted slightly, and Harold caught the familiar scent of his shampoo, the warmth radiating from his skin. They were close enough that Harold could see the concern etched in Arthur's features, the way his brow furrowed with genuine care. "You've been having trouble sleeping for weeks now," Arthur said quietly. I can hear you tossing and turning. Is something wrong? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications Harold wasn't ready to face. Everything was wrong. His entire understanding of himself was crumbling, and the person he most wanted to talk to about it was the very source of his confusion. I'm fine, Harold lied, but his voice cracked on the words. Arthur's expression softened with disbelief. Harold, we've been friends for years. I know when you're not fine. You've been different lately, distant. Did I do something wrong? The pain in Arthur's voice cut through Harold like a blade. This was exactly what he'd been trying to avoid, hurting Arthur, making him question their friendship. But his attempts to protect Arthur had only caused more damage. No, Harold said quickly, perhaps too quickly. You didn't do anything wrong. It's not you. Then what is it? Arthur's voice was barely above a whisper, but in the quiet of their bedroom, it felt like a shout. Because I feel like I'm losing my best friend, and I don't understand why. Harold's throat constricted. Arthur was right. He was losing his best friend, but not for the reasons he thought. Harold was pulling away because staying close felt like betrayal, like taking advantage of Arthur's trust while harboring feelings that could destroy everything between them. I just need some space, Harold managed. But even as he said it, he knew how hollow it sounded. Arthur was quiet for a long moment, and Harold could see him processing this, trying to understand. When Arthur spoke again, his voice was smaller, more vulnerable. Is it because of how I sleep? Because I face you now instead of the wall? I know it's probably weird, sharing a room like this at our age, but I sleep better when I can see you. It helps with the insomnia. But if it makes you uncomfortable, Harold's heart shattered. Arthur was blaming himself, offering to change the very thing that had become Harold's secret obsession. The idea that Arthur might go back to facing the wall, that Harold might lose those quiet moments of watching him sleep, felt unbearable. It's not that, Harold said, his voice strained. Arthur, it's really not about how you sleep. Then help me understand, Arthur pleaded, and before Harold could react, Arthur's hand reached across the space between their beds, his fingers brushing against Harold's arm. Please, I hate seeing you like this. I hate that you won't talk to me anymore. The touch was electric, sending shockwaves through Harold's entire system. Arthur's fingers were warm against his skin, gentle and seeking comfort in the way they always had. But now, every point of contact felt loaded with meaning Harold couldn't voice. Harold jerked his arm away as if burned, and immediately regretted it when he saw Arthur's face crumple with hurt. Arthur's hand hung suspended in the air for a moment before he slowly pulled it back, his expression shifting from concern to something deeper, a wounded confusion that made Harold's chest ache. I'm sorry, Arthur whispered, and Harold could hear the tears threatening in his voice. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to help. Arthur. No, Harold started, but Arthur was already turning away, rolling to face the wall for the first time in months. The sight of Arthur's back, the rigid line of his shoulders, the way he curled in on himself, it was devastating. Harold had spent weeks trying to protect their friendship, and in one moment, he'd managed to damage it more than any confession could have. Arthur, please, Harold said, his voice breaking. Don't turn away. Please. But Arthur didn't move, and Harold could see the slight tremor in his shoulders that suggested he was crying. The sound of Arthur's muffled breathing, the way he was trying to cry silently so as not to disturb Harold further, was more than Harold could bear. Harold sat up in bed, running his hands through his hair, feeling like he was suffocating. The room felt smaller than ever, the space between their beds both too much and not enough. He wanted to reach out, to comfort Arthur, to explain that the rejection had nothing to do with Arthur's worth and everything to do with Harold's own fear. But how could he explain without revealing the truth that terrified him? I'm sorry, Harold whispered into the darkness, not sure if Arthur was even listening. I'm so sorry, Arthur. You didn't do anything wrong. This is all me. Arthur's breathing had evened out, but Harold could tell he wasn't asleep. The quality of his stillness was different, alert, wounded, waiting. Harold lay back down, staring at the ceiling, knowing that sleep would be impossible now. He'd managed to hurt the person he cared about most in the world, all in the name of protecting him. The irony wasn't lost on Harold. In trying to preserve their friendship by hiding his feelings, he'd created a chasm between them that felt impossible to bridge. Arthur's trust, his easy affection, his willingness to be vulnerable. Harold had thrown it all back in his face with that one reflexive rejection. Hours passed in silence, both of them lying awake in their respective beds, separated by mere feet, but feeling miles apart. Harold listened to Arthur's breathing, knowing his friend was struggling with his own confusion and hurt. The distance Harold had created felt like a physical wound, and he wondered if there was any way to repair the damage without revealing the truth that had caused it. As dawn approached, Harold realized that his attempts to protect their friendship had only succeeded in destroying it from the inside. The question now wasn't whether to tell Arthur the truth, but whether Arthur would even want to listen after tonight's rejection. Harold had built walls to protect them both, but those same walls were now threatening to crush everything he held dear. The morning light filtered through our thin curtains, casting long shadows across the divide between our beds. I hadn't slept. Arthur had turned away from me sometime during the night, his shoulders rigid with hurt, and I'd spent the hours watching his silhouette and hating myself for putting that distance there. When he finally stirred, sitting up and running his hands through his hair, I pretended to be asleep. But Arthur knew me too well. "Harold." His voice was quiet, careful. "I know you're awake." I opened my eyes, meeting his gaze across the space that suddenly felt like a canyon. His face was tired, but there was something else there. A determination I recognized from college when he'd refused to let me skip finals after my dad died. "We need to talk," he said, swinging his legs over the side of his bed. "Really talk. Not whatever this has been for the past few weeks." I sat up slowly, every muscle in my body tense. "Arthur, No." He held up a hand. "I've been patient. I've given you space. I've pretended not to notice when you flinch away from me or when you can't look me in the eye. But last night," his voice cracked slightly, "last night you looked at me like I was something dangerous." The words hit me like a physical blow. "That's not." "Then what is it?" Arthur stood up, pacing the small space between our beds. "Because I'm losing my mind here, Harold. My best friend, the person I trust more than anyone in the world, suddenly can't stand to be near me, and I don't know what I did wrong." I watched him pace. This man who'd been my anchor for years, who'd helped me through breakups and job rejections and family drama, who'd never asked for anything in return except my friendship. And I was destroying him. "You didn't do anything wrong," I said quietly. "Then why?" He stopped pacing, turning to face me. "Why do you look at me like you're afraid of me? Why do you move away when I try to comfort you? Why can't you tell me what's going on?" The questions hung in the air between us, and I could see the hurt in his eyes, the confusion that had been building for weeks. Arthur had always been the stronger one, the one who faced problems head-on while I overthought everything. But now he looked lost, and it was my fault. "Because I'm afraid," I admitted, the words barely audible. "Afraid of what?" He sat down on the edge of my bed, close enough that I could smell his familiar scent, soap and coffee, and something uniquely Arthur. "We've been friends for 8 years. There's nothing you can't tell me." I almost laughed at the irony. There was one thing, one massive thing that could change everything between us. But looking at his face, seeing the genuine concern and love there, I realized that my silence was already changing everything. I was already losing him. "I've been questioning things," I said slowly, each word feeling like I was pulling it from somewhere deep inside my chest. "About myself. About what I want. About who I am." Arthur's expression softened. "Okay, what kind of things?" I couldn't look at him. Instead, I stared at my hands, at the way they were shaking slightly. The women I've dated. The relationships that never felt quite right. The way I've always felt like I was playing a role, trying to be someone I thought I should be. "Harold." His voice was gentle now, understanding. "Are you saying you think you might be gay?" The word hung between us, and I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief, exactly, but something close to it. "I don't know. Maybe. I've been so confused, and I didn't know how to talk about it, because I've spent my whole life being one thing, and now I might be something completely different." Arthur was quiet for a long moment. When I finally looked up, his eyes were warm, concerned but not shocked. "You know that wouldn't change anything between us, right? You're still my best friend. You're still the person I care about most in the world." The kindness in his voice almost broke me. "But it does change things. It changes everything." "How?" I stood up abruptly, needing to move, needing to put some distance between us before I said something I couldn't take back. "Because it's not just about figuring out who I am. It's about specific feelings. About a specific person." Arthur went very still. "What do you mean?" I couldn't face him. Instead, I walked to the window, looking out at the city waking up below us. I mean that all this confusion, all this questioning, it's not happening in a vacuum. It's happening because of someone in my life. Someone I care about. Someone I've been trying not to think about in ways that scare me. Harold. His voice was careful now, like he was approaching a wounded animal. Who are you talking about? I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of weeks of secrecy and fear pressing down on me. I can't tell you that. I can't risk losing you completely. You're not going to lose me. He stood up, and I could hear him moving closer. Whatever this is, whoever it is, we'll figure it out together. That's what we do. Not this time. I turned around, and he was closer than I'd expected, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. This time, telling you the truth could ruin everything. Could make you uncomfortable living here. Could make you look at me differently. Harold, you're my best friend. There's nothing. There is. The words came out harsher than I intended. There are things that change friendships. Things that make it impossible to go back to the way things were. Arthur studied my face for a long moment, and I could see him thinking, processing. Is that why you've been pulling away? Because you're afraid of how I'll react. I'm afraid of a lot of things, I admitted. I'm afraid of being someone I don't understand. I'm afraid of wanting something I can't have. I'm afraid of hurting someone I care about just by existing in their space. You're not hurting anyone by existing, Arthur said firmly. And you're not hurting anyone by figuring out who you are. That's human, Harold. That's normal. This doesn't feel normal. I ran my hands through my hair, feeling the familiar weight of exhaustion and confusion. This feels like I'm losing my mind. Like I'm becoming someone I don't recognize. Maybe you're not becoming someone different, Arthur said quietly. Maybe you're just becoming more yourself. The words hit me unexpectedly, and I felt tears prick at my eyes. I don't know how to be more myself. I don't know how to want what I want without destroying everything good in my life. What do you want? The question was simple, but I could hear the weight behind it. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the man who'd been my constant for 8 years. The man who'd held me when I cried, who'd celebrated my victories, who'd made me laugh when I thought the world was ending. The man who slept facing me every night, who trusted me enough to be vulnerable in the darkness. I want to be brave enough to tell the truth, I said finally. But I don't know how to be that brave. Arthur stepped closer, and this time I didn't pull away. Start small, he said. Tell me one true thing. Just one. I looked into his eyes, seeing the same warmth and acceptance that had been there since college, and felt something shift inside me. Maybe I couldn't tell him everything. Maybe I couldn't risk our friendship by confessing feelings that might not be returned. But maybe I could give him this much. I'm not the same person I was a month ago, I said. And I'm terrified that means I'm not the friend you need me to be. Arthur's face softened, and he reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away. When I didn't, he placed his hand on my shoulder. You're exactly the friend I need you to be. Confused, scared, figuring things out. You're still Harold. You're still the person I choose to share my life with. The simple touch, the acceptance in his voice, made something crack open in my chest. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I'm sorry, I whispered, for pulling away, for making you think you did something wrong, for being such a mess. You don't have to apologize for being human, Arthur said. But maybe we can figure this out together instead of you carrying it alone. I nodded, not trusting my voice. It wasn't a full confession, wasn't the complete truth I knew I'd have to face eventually. But it was a start. It was one step toward being brave enough to be myself, even if I wasn't sure who that person was yet. That night, the darkness between our beds felt different. The air was thick with unspoken truths and the weight of my partial confession still hanging between us. Arthur had been quiet during dinner, processing what I'd told him about questioning my sexuality, about having feelings for someone I was afraid to lose. He'd been patient, supportive, but I could see the questions in his eyes that he was too kind to ask. I lay on my side, facing away from him for once, unable to bear the intimacy of our usual nighttime arrangement. The guilt was eating me alive. Here was my best friend, offering me unconditional support through what he thought was some abstract identity crisis, when really he was the center of it all. Every gesture of comfort felt like a betrayal of his trust. Harold, Arthur's voice was soft in the darkness, barely above a whisper. Yeah, you don't have to face away from me, you know. Whatever you're going through, it doesn't change anything between us. The kindness in his voice made my chest tight. I turned over slowly, meeting his eyes across the small space between our beds. Even in the dim light filtering through our curtains, I could see the concern etched in his features. I know you said you're not ready to talk about who it is, Arthur continued, his voice careful but warm. But I want you to know that I've been thinking about what you told me, about questioning things about yourself. My heart hammered against my ribs. What about it? Arthur was quiet for a long moment, and I watched him gather his thoughts. I've been thinking about why I started sleeping facing you instead of the wall. I told myself it was just the insomnia, that I felt safer this way. But that's not the whole truth. I held my breath, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever spell was allowing him to be this vulnerable. The truth is, Arthur whispered, I sleep better facing you because you make me feel connected, like I'm not alone in the world. I've never felt that way about anyone before, not even the girls I've dated. I thought it was just friendship, but lately, he trailed off, and I saw him swallow hard in the darkness. Lately, I prompted, my voice barely audible. Lately I've been wondering if maybe I've been lying to myself too, about what I feel for you. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard, certain this was some cruel trick my desperate mind was playing on me. Arthur, I whispered, his name a prayer on my lips. I know this is probably the worst possible timing, he continued, his voice shaking slightly. Here you are, dealing with feelings for someone else, and I'm making it about me. But I couldn't keep pretending that the way I feel about you is just friendship. Not when you're being so brave about facing your own truth. The irony was almost unbearable. Here he was, confessing feelings for me while thinking I was struggling with feelings for someone else. The deception felt like poison in my veins. Arthur, I need to tell you something. The words came out before I could stop them. He went very still. Okay. When I said I had feelings for someone I was afraid to lose, I took a shuddering breath. I was talking about you. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched Arthur's face in the dim light, saw the moment comprehension dawned in his eyes. Me, he whispered. You. I felt tears prick at my eyes. It's always been you. Every night, watching you sleep facing me, feeling like I was stealing something I had no right to. Every time you touched my hand or leaned against me during movies, I felt like I was betraying your trust by wanting more. Arthur's breathing had changed, become shallow and quick. Harold, I know this ruins everything. I rushed on, the words pouring out now that the dam had broken. I know I've been lying to you, letting you comfort me about feelings I supposedly had for someone else, when really you were the one I was afraid of losing. I know I'm probably destroying our friendship right now, but I couldn't keep lying. Not when you were being so honest with me. You think this ruins everything? Arthur's voice was incredulous. I nodded miserably. Doesn't it? To my amazement, Arthur laughed. Not mockingly, but with something that sounded almost like relief. Harold, you beautiful idiot. I just told you I've been questioning my own feelings for you. How exactly does this ruin anything? I blinked at him through the darkness. But I lied to you. I let you think. You let me think you were scared and confused about having feelings for your best friend. Arthur interrupted gently. Which is exactly what was happening. You just didn't tell me I was the best friend in question. You're not angry? Arthur was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was soft with understanding. I'm not angry. I'm relieved, actually, and maybe a little scared, but not angry. Scared. This changes everything between us, Harold. If we do this, if we explore whatever this is, there's no going back to just being roommates and best friends. Are you ready for that? I thought about all the nights I'd lain awake watching him sleep, all the moments I'd cherished his casual touches while hating myself for wanting more, all the times I'd felt like I was living a lie. I've been ready for longer than I knew how to admit. Arthur smiled then, soft and tentative in the darkness. So what do we do now? I don't know, I admitted. I've never done this before. I've never felt like this about anyone before. Neither have I, Arthur said quietly. But maybe we can figure it out together. The space between our beds suddenly felt like an ocean. I wanted to reach for him, to close the distance that had felt so insurmountable just moments before, but I wasn't sure if I was allowed to want that yet. As if reading my thoughts, Arthur extended his hand across the gap between us. Can I? I reached out without hesitation, our fingers intertwining in the space between our beds. His hand was warm, solid, real. This wasn't another dream or fantasy. This was happening. We'll take it slow, Arthur murmured, his thumb tracing gentle circles on my palm. "We'll figure out what this means for us." I nodded, not trusting my voice. For the first time in months, the weight on my chest began to lift. The secret that had been eating me alive was finally out in the open, and instead of destroying everything, it had somehow made everything possible. We lay there in the darkness, hands linked across the space between our beds, both of us too wired to sleep, but too content to let go. Tomorrow would bring new questions, new challenges, new territories to navigate. But tonight, for the first time since this all began, I wasn't facing them alone. "Harold," Arthur's voice was drowsy now, finally relaxed. "Yeah. Thank you for trusting me with the truth." I squeezed his hand gently. "Thank you for making it safe to tell." The confession hung between us in the darkness like a bridge neither of us was sure we could cross. Arthur's quiet, "I have feelings for you too," echoed in my mind as we lay there, the space between our beds feeling both infinite and non-existent. Sleep came in fragments that night, but for the first time in months, I wasn't tormented by watching him. Instead, I was held by the knowledge that he was watching me back. The next morning brought awkwardness wrapped in coffee and careful glances. Arthur made pancakes, his nervous habit, while I sat at our small kitchen table, both of us dancing around the elephant that had taken up residence in our apartment. We'd crossed into uncharted territory, and neither of us had a map. "So," Arthur said, sliding a plate toward me, his fingers brushing mine longer than necessary. "What happens now?" I looked up at him, this man who'd been my anchor for years, now standing there with flour in his hair and vulnerability in his eyes. "I don't know," I admitted. "I've never, with anyone, let alone my best friend." He nodded, settling into the chair across from me. "Yeah, me neither. The guy part, and definitely not the best friend part." He paused, fork halfway to his mouth. "Are we still best friends?" The question hit me harder than I expected. "I hope so. I hope we're more than that. But I can't lose you, Arthur." "Not you. You won't," he said simply, and something in his certainty made my chest tight with relief. The following days unfolded like a careful dance. We established new rhythms. Arthur would rest his hand on my shoulder while we watched movies. I'd let myself really look at him when he spoke. Small touches became intentional rather than accidental. We talked more, about everything and nothing, filling the spaces where uncertainty might creep in. Arthur started therapy, working through his own questions about identity and attraction. I found myself researching support groups, reading articles about late-in-life sexual discovery, trying to understand this version of myself that had been hiding in plain sight. We shared our discoveries like gifts, building a foundation of honesty beneath whatever we were becoming. 2 weeks after our midnight confessions, Arthur came home from work to find me pacing the living room, clearly agitated. "What's wrong?" he asked, dropping his bag and moving toward me with that instinctive care that had always been so natural between us. "I called my sister," I said. "I told her about us." "About me?" Arthur's eyes widened. "How did that go?" "She said she'd been wondering for years when I'd figure it out." I laughed shakily. Apparently, I was the only one who didn't know. Arthur reached for my hands, grounding me. "How do you feel about that?" "Terrified. Relieved. Like I'm finally becoming who I was supposed to be." I squeezed his fingers. "She wants to meet you. Officially, as my whatever we are." "What are we?" Arthur asked softly. I looked at him. Really looked at him. This man who'd been patient with my fears, who'd been brave enough to question his own assumptions, who'd chosen to sleep facing me every night even before he understood why. "I'd like to find out," I said. That night, we stood in our bedroom, the space between our twin beds suddenly feeling ridiculous. Arthur hesitated at the edge of his mattress, looking at me with a question in his eyes. "Would it be okay if—" he started, then stopped, color rising in his cheeks. "If what?" "If I slept over there tonight?" He nodded toward my bed. "Not for anything dramatic, just, I think I'd sleep better. With you." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Yeah, I'd like that." We moved with careful deliberation, Arthur gathering his pillow while I pulled back my covers. The mattress dipped as he settled beside me, and for a moment we lay there stiffly, hyper-aware of every breath and heartbeat. Then Arthur turned to face me, just like he had across the room for all those nights. Except now I could feel the warmth of his skin, smell the familiar scent of his shampoo. "Hi," he whispered. "Hi," I whispered back. I'm glad you told me, he said. About your feelings. About everything. I'm glad you listened. Arthur's hand found mine under the covers, our fingers intertwining with a naturalness that felt like coming home. Harold, yeah, I think I'm falling in love with you. The words settled over me like a blessing I'd never thought to ask for. I think I already fell, I admitted. I just didn't know what to call it. Arthur smiled, and in the dim light filtering through our bedroom window, I saw my future written in the curve of his lips, the warmth in his eyes, the way he'd chosen to face me every night even before either of us understood what that meant. Good, he said simply. I closed my eyes, feeling Arthur's steady breathing beside me, his thumb tracing gentle circles on my hand. For the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of what morning might bring. Whatever we were becoming it together. And when I woke up hours later, Arthur was still facing me, still choosing me, still here.